Jane, we haven't spoken in a I don't think we've even spoken since you've graduated. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, I think you're right. So I
Okay.
guess it's been like 8 years.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's been quite some time. Where do we begin with something that's gapped 8 years? How have you been?
I've been doing really well, especially I think lately, and I think this conversation is coming at a time where I think it's interesting just with the things that you're exploring. So yeah, I guess I can give like an overview of what I've been up to for the past 8 years.
Yeah, yeah, always that's a huge task, of course. But yeah, to the extent that you could share a story, I'd be super curious what you've been up to since I haven't heard anything from you in quite some time.
Yeah. Yeah, so I graduated, yeah, in 2017. I went straight into consulting. Worked out of Toronto for I think about a little over 3 years. So that was a really good experience. I think overall, I learned a lot. It was kind of the dream, at least when I was in business school. That was kind of the aspiration. So it was cool to experience. And then COVID hit, and I think that was when I started to take a very good inventory of like, is this what I want to do? I think it kind of made a lot of people realize, like, let's just take a step back and see if I'm, living the life I want to be. And so for me, I felt like a no. And so I wanted to pivot and try something different. And so during my consulting time, I did work in the US, and I think I've always felt a bit of a pull there to kind of explore working in the US. And so I decided to try a tech company in New York. And so that was the pivot that I made post-COVID. So yeah, I guess I worked there for about 3 years as well. And I think I've learned a lot, moving to a new city and trying a completely different lifestyle. And yeah, I felt like I grew a lot. But then I felt like I hit another bit of a pivot point where I was like, I feel like I am doing everything that I was told that I should have done and feel fulfilled and happy, but I'm not. So I took a big courage of just like walking away from the corporate world. So I guess it's been almost a year now where I'm just exploring. I'm exploring who I am, what I want, what my values are, what I really want out of life. And I think most importantly, actually creating a deeper relationship with myself and in a way, kind of developing all of uh, the things that I felt like I should have developed early on in life, that clarity of who I am and what I want. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting transition, right? Going from the dream of consulting, trying the, enticing corporate, the tech world to now just being like, I don't know what I truly want, but I know that I want to create something that's aligned with my purpose and who I am and my skill set. And I'm just navigating the unknown right now, which feels really scary, but really exciting at the same time.
Okay. Wow. That I'm going to be honest, that was not the story exactly that I would have thought you'd say, partly because it's so for everyone listening or watching, this is absolutely not scripted. So by bizarre coincidence, I wrote a book on this exact same subject. And
So I saw that yesterday actually, I was just kind of like doing some research and I was like, oh wow, like Ryan wrote this book and I kind of wish I picked it up and read it before our call, but yeah, it does seem like at least just reading the synopsis, I was like, this is sounds like exactly what I need.
yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. So I think, I mean, we'll get to this in a moment. There are so many questions actually I have about your story that I want to ask kind of sequentially, just to fill in the gaps. But
Yeah.
um, it does sound like that what's been happening. So on your side, you went at least up until now through your own kind of journey of figuring out certain things, right? And then actually on my side as a prof, watching all of you guys and hearing all these different stories that actually seem to be quite common.
Yeah.
Me also figuring out like, wait a second, like there's
Yeah.
something not quite right about all this.
Hmm.
And then sort of, but we're kind of looking at the same thing, which I think is kind of
Yeah.
interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
let's just fill in the gaps. So you told that was a great synopsis. right? I mean, beautifully, this is Ivy training at work, right? You guys can summarize 8 years into like a 2.5 minute monologue, super efficient in bullet points. So but of course, let's make that kind of more real.
Yeah.
So when you're graduating HBA, at that point, Jane, did you have any internal doubts or questions or anything, or were you all in? Were you, this is it?
I was all in. I
Yeah.
was and like I was sold on the dream, to be honest. Like it felt like at the time like that was almost like a gold medal in my head of like this is like I did what I was meant to achieve out of undergrad. Like this is great. Um, but I would say a couple weeks in, or maybe a couple months in, you kind of start seeing the gaps, right, of what the dream was sold for to you versus your actual experience. But I think generally speaking, at least at the very beginning, I was very much still in the dream, right, of this is the path. And I started studying for my GMAT. I was planning on doing my MBA. So very much like the dream that was sold, I was all in it for at least like the first 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So a devout follower of the religion, so to speak, and
Yeah.
yeah, we're very well trained, by the way. Having taught at
Hmm.
Ivy, this is absolutely the mantra, right? So,
Yeah.
so you were a great disciple, and then reality hits, and you're like, wait a second. But even at that time, it's not instant. It seems like it's kind of still evolving. You're like, how come this is not exactly what I was promised, right?
Yeah.
And COVID comes. COVID's really interesting because it's not every day that a pandemic comes to create a bunch of quarter life crises like it did for, it sounds
Mhm.
like, you and a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
Not surprising though, right? Because great resignation hits then, basically,
Yeah.
right? At that point. I'm not sure it would have happened so abruptly, so suddenly, and in such a big headline driven wave, if it wasn't for that pandemic. But yeah, it seems like that creates this interrupt where everyone's like, wait a second.
Mm.
And it happens. I've been looking into this, kind of offline, and it seems like that there were a number of places in the world where this was going on, right?
Yeah.
Even in places
Yeah.
like China and the US, like there's a very common kind of theme that everyone ran into. And then so out of that, you do the reflection, you're just so I remember correctly what you were saying. At that point, are you in Toronto or you're not, right? Or you
Yeah. No,
are?
I was still in Toronto at the
Okay,
time.
still in Toronto, not yet in New York. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So the reason I bring that up is that on your side of the border, you had a very long lockdown you had to deal
Mhm.
with. So let's frame that positively. Way more time to reflect than
Yeah,
maybe
exactly.
many of us might have had down here south of the border. So that pushes that even more. And then you said you felt drawn to New York. Did I catch that correctly?
Yeah, so I think it was a handful of things. I think the main thing for me during COVID was, well, one, just like really slow down from like the day to day and really reflect like what am I doing, right? Because I think it's really easy to get lost on the when you're in autopilot of every day you go to work, you kind of have your routine and I think it's the abrupt kind of stop of like, oh, everything is changing. But I think on top of it, I was both fortunate and, I guess in a way where I was actually helping Ontario with pandemic response as part of my consulting project, which is in itself very rewarding, but at the same time, like very stressful, right? Because none of us really knew
Yep.
what it is that we were expecting and working. And so I was working like 14-hour days and had client calls on weekends. And I think it really pushed me to a point where I had to sacrifice my mental well-being in order to deliver what was required.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And that, okay, I mean, 14-hour days plus weekends. I mean, this will cause one to start questioning things, right? Once you get
Yeah,
physically tired and all these work-life
yeah,
balance by definition goes out the window at that point because you've got sleep,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And then you've got eating and you've got a bunch of other things that you need to survive.
Yeah. And I think
Uh,
it also, on top of it, like I think the perks of consulting all disappeared, right? Like no travel, no, the expenses. I think, a lot of us are also like very much tied on with the golden handcuffs of consulting and, a lot of different careers, but it's like it's all of a sudden it's just work. And you kind of really see things for what it is without the flashy, nice, like dinners being comped or like being able to travel and do all these things. And so, for me, that was also kind of a gift in itself to really like reflect on that.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and I would say like I think my pivot was it was gradual in a sense of like, okay, I know what I don't want, right? Which is lack of work-life balance, and I also kind of had a hint of what I do want, which is explore a new environment, new city. And I felt like, working in tech had better work-life balance, and I've always been drawn to the US. So for me, that was kind of like the next step, right? I don't think it's as extreme as where I'm now, so we'll get to that later. But I think that at that time it was more like, okay, like this is the information that I know, and this is kind of like the next step that made the most sense for me, given the information that I knew. So that was why I decided to kind of make that switch. Yeah.
Yeah, which makes sense, right? I mean, the way this transition tends to work is that in the beginning, something's not quite right, or you had expectations that aren't met, frankly,
Hmm.
right? Because
Hmm.
school does such a great job of giving false expectations for you guys to follow. So not shockingly, that those end up being disappointing in some way, and then and then it always starts with usually not with, oh, I know exactly what I want now. It's, wait, I know I don't want this, right?
Hmm.
And then where it gets interesting is you might think that at that point everyone makes changes, and I think in your generation, right? Because Jane, we are of a different age. That's way more likely.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of people I knew when I was going through this similar path who just stayed, right? Because they thought that that was still like the best, most optimized option for life, right?
Yeah.
For them. And there's obviously I'm value judging, but I feel like there's something always a little bit sad when that ends up being the story. I don't think they end up on my podcast, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
sort of worried that I'll run into the guest that says, yeah, I kind of hated it for like 20 years and I haven't
Right.
done anything about it. So,
Right. Yeah.
okay, so you've gone through this. Transition makes sense. New York, you're drawn to New York. Sometimes we have these kind of mysterious, like, why am I drawn to X? You don't know why, but you are. So then you just go with it. Totally makes
Mhm.
sense, and you end up in tech. And so how is that?
Um, Looking back, I would say underwhelming.
Okay.
But heading into it, I was very excited because I think for me at the time, it felt like it was going to provide me with the learning opportunity and also just like a little more hands-on because I think with consulting, you're kind of always a little bit of a distance away from what's going on, right? Like you're advising, but you're not really taking ownership for things. And that was something that I really wanted to try. And so for the first little while, and I felt like I was learning a lot, and it was great. But it's similar with consulting, where it's like, a couple months in, like something still felt like it was off, right? It's this feeling that you can't pinpoint, but you're like deep down, like I know this is not what I meant to do. And so that kind of started creeping up. And so at the time, I was actually, really exploring like maybe I could start something on the side. Although there are, restrictions with the work visa. So like, I could only really like brainstorm, but I couldn't really execute. So that was kind of the dilemma there. But what I realized was that also just like it was really comfortable being in a job to a point where it's like my heart knew I wanted to start something. I really wanted to work on something else and create something else. But I was just really caught up with the comfort of the lifestyle that I had, right, in New York. And it was great. I had great friends and I was experiencing a lot of things. And so, in a way, it almost kind of took a little bit longer for me to actually really jump in to the next step because of the lifestyle that I was really accustomed to. So, in a way, I think life kind of decided to nudge me. And so our company actually got bought out. And so they bought our digital assets and didn't want any employees. So it was like everyone, including the CEO, got laid off. And so, and for me, like in that moment, it was a little uncomfortable, but for me, I was like, oh, like this is what I needed, right? And I was in a way thankful for that because it was the push, right? It was the push of like, okay, like this is what I've been wanting to do, but just have kept on delaying. Like now it's time to really step into it. So yeah, so that was the next transition point.
So one thing I'm curious about, because what's really interesting about your story is so far you've had two big shocks fall from the sky, right?
Hmm.
One is
Yeah.
COVID,
Yeah.
right? And the other is, well, this your company getting bought out and them saying, well, actually, we didn't really want you guys, right? So
Yep.
so pack up and leave. So those were not things that you obviously would have signed up for necessarily, but they
Mhm.
were defining pivotal kind of turning points that caused you to reflect. Do you think that without those, you would have still kind of gotten to the same place anyway, or do you feel like actually I kind of needed those for this to happen?
That's a really good question. I think personally, I always have a pretty good connection with myself in a sense of like if something is off, I can notice it. But I think it probably would have taken a lot longer, like if it weren't for the external nudge, because, like we talked about, like sometimes being in that comfort zone of not really having to just like walk away from something and step into the unknown, quite frankly, it can be really scary. I think without the external nudge, it probably would have taken me a lot longer. I think I still would have gotten there, but that's why I think I'm very thankful, like especially looking back to have had those things happen to me because in a way, it really did really just yeah push me into the right direction.
Yeah, and I like the wording that you use, like it was a nudge. These things, even though it doesn't sound like a nudge, it sounds like you were pushed, right?
Yeah.
Like fairly
So,
forcefully into a different sort of category. But yeah, to your credit, at every one of these points, there's still a crossroads and a choice you can make, right? You could easily have chosen to continue just somewhere else, right? Or
yeah, totally.
to swap into something else that's kind of familiar that the messaging in school we gave you would have taught you, right? Because school
Yeah.
did not teach you what you're doing right now. Definitely not.
No.
No.
Yeah, it's actually funny because yeah, the moment everyone found out at work, like everyone started updating their resume, start sending it out, and a lot of people had like the aspiration of finding a job before the severance ends so they can get paid twice as much. It's just really funny to kind of see different people's reaction, right? Whereas for me, yeah, I mean, I was tempted to say like, okay, let's find a safety net. But I had to just like really sit with myself and to say like, okay, is that what I want? And in a way, I don't want to get too morbid about it, but in a way, it's like, I had to also like think about like, if I were to go down that path and at the end of my life, looking back, like, am I going to regret not taking the risk? Am I going to regret not stepping into that unknown, knowing in my heart that that's the right direction? Right. And so I think that in a way really helped to pull me through the discomfort and the fear and really just doing things completely differently than what I was taught.
I am getting chills down my spine because I actually have a chapter in my book exactly on the same subject of what you
Oh,
just did. Yeah, yeah. So
wow.
obviously you haven't read it, but it's
I really need to read this book.
we yeah, or this is like the best unscripted podcast that seemed to be coincidentally scripted, right, by somebody else. Because yeah,
Yeah.
okay, all right. Let's see what else is going on then. So
Yeah.
all right, so you get to that point. It's been now a year. You've been exploring.
Hmm.
What have you been doing? Because I think a lot of people who reach these points of, well, I know it's not this. I know it's time to leave, but I don't know what to do, end up staying because they don't even know what exploring means, right? Like, what am I going to
Literally.
go do? And that lack of being able to see anything and to take that leap stops them from doing things. You obviously have been doing something.
Yeah.
What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I would say just for some context, I think during COVID was actually when I really doubled down into like the self-development and psychology area of things. It was something that I've always been drawn to, but honestly, just like didn't really have time or the attention really for it during school. And so during COVID, that was when I, started reading and really going to seminars, learning about different things, and really understand my own psychology and understanding like how in a way like how society operates. And I was able to kind of already see a little bit of gaps. And I think that was the initial nudge for me while I was still in New York to say, okay, like this is like I need to do something, right? So that was kind of what started this whole thing. But the moment when I decided, okay, like let's jump in, for me, it was creating from a place of authenticity. And I realized that so much of my life, my choices, my decisions, and what I did was based on societal conditioning or conditioning that I picked up from parents and other people in a way where I created a life that I was told was going to be fulfilling, but it's not. And I thought I was doing everything out of my own autonomy, if you will, but realizing, oh, that's actually not the case. These decisions were conditioned into me. That's not the real me. So I think my number one priority at the time was like actually really letting go and shedding all of the things that are not mine, and really come back to myself first.
Wow. I say wow because, I've done this job for a long time, and I have a bunch of former students that I talk to from time to time. This is a huge struggle for the vast majority of them. In other words, it's not hard to know that you're not super happy. It's not hard to know that it's not this, whatever this is that you're doing. The imagination of what to do next, that's a little bit hard. But what's really hard for a lot of people is to start to begin to understand what part is me and what part was imposed upon me that
Yeah.
I accepted as me, right?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
because that you really have to dig deep, right? To kind of dig into yourself. And this isn't always a terribly pleasant exercise or an easy exercise. Um, Often, very often, it's very helpful if you have a guide or a facilitator, but even that's a semi-dangerous sort of world because we mostly live in a world actually where instead of guides and facilitators in the true sense, you have people who just love imposing their view of the world on you.
Yeah.
Right? So when the world is mostly that and you're feeling a little bit vulnerable, it's not this, you're looking for, meaning or fulfillment, there's tons of people selling that stuff, but it's not based on self-reflection. It's based upon, hey, I've got this great group you can join. You just need to buy my values, right, in order
Yeah.
to get in.
Yeah.
You've managed to completely circumvent that, which is actually a remarkable accomplishment because not only have you realize that that's the work I need to do, like this is me and this is the stuff that was imposed upon me. At least so far, it sounds like you've also dodged oh, I found this great new group that I can join called XYZ, and they've told me everything I need to know.
I wouldn't say that. I think
Oh,
that was
no?
actually part of my path.
Oh, it
Yeah. So
was. Oh,
yeah. Yeah. So
okay.
I would say, yeah, I think, especially before I jumped full in, like, when I was still in New York, like I said, I kind of became a little bit of like a self-development junkie. So I was very much sold on, okay, it's not this, then what is it, right? So I had to go through a period of exploration as well. And, I have invested a lot in my own self-development. I see it as an investment, but I have invested in things that similar to what you said, which people kind of sell you on this quick fix or this like vision of like you want to achieve this, like this is how you do it, without really taking a step back and actually thinking about like, is this really what I want, right? Like, why do I really want this in the first place? So I have gone through that a little bit as well, and like realizing, okay, like this doesn't feel right. And so I think it actually took a little bit of trial and error for me to kind of reach the next step, which is like, okay, like instead of chasing the next vision, thinking that whatever the result will fill this void that I'm feeling on the inside, like clearly that's not the path. So then it became really apparent that I needed to really go deeper.
And I see. Okay, I mean, I take your point, but I'm not actually sure it's dramatically different than what I said, unless you're telling me that you had like a 3 month period where you were in a commune somewhere believing things
Oh,
that now you're just like, I don't know what I was thinking.
yeah, not to that extent.
Not to that extent, right? So of course,
Yeah.
part of exploration is you just like try because you don't really know. and and then whenever it didn't feel right, you just hit the eject button and you went to sort of look. So
Yeah.
that I don't think is massively different than what I was saying. I'm not presuming
Okay.
kind of beforehand ultimate wisdom where you're like, well, clearly not that, right? I'm not sure you
Yeah,
would easily. I'm not sure anyone would easily be able to know that
absolutely.
beforehand, right? Given
Yeah.
how, to be perfectly candid, how poorly we educated you guys to be ready for
Mhm.
this part of life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which, I think
Exactly.
it's fair to say we've done a pretty terrible job of that. So the thing that I'm wondering about is you've kind of gone through all this. It's the way you tell the story. Every time you're in something that doesn't resonate, it sounds like you have just a feeling. Or do you actually have a full-blown rational explanation? You're like, whoa, XYZ, this is obviously not working. I've analyzed it and I've done all the pros and cons, and this is not it. It sounds like that's not how you kind of decided a lot of the points of
Mhm.
going, left or right. Is that right? I'm
Yeah.
wondering how your decision-making process worked.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it always starts with the feeling of like something is off. And then it's for me it's asking the why. I think why, asking layers and layers of why really helps me get into the bottom of it. So it's like, for example, like when I'm in that career, it's like, why did I want it? Like what does that get me, right? And just kind of go deeper, like whether it's money or this feeling of stability, it's like, why do I need that, right? Like what and I think what that then gives me is my underlying intention of like this is the reason I'm doing it. And often I find that when I arrive at the deeper whys, it's always like, oh, like to, feel like I'm successful so I can prove it to like my parents or, my parents have never really given me a lot of pressure actually, but it's more like the people around me thinking I need to prove myself or thinking like that success, career success will create stability, like whatever it may be. The why, when I get to deep enough, it's always so apparent that that isn't the aligned path with who I truly am. So I do go deep in that sense, but I don't do like a mental pros and cons, as in like, oh, this will be great and that will, because I think again, that's very surface level. That's very much like, oh, like this will make me feel good, that'll make me feel bad. Versus actually going deeper and being like, what is the underlying intention and what do I truly want? And what is the most aligned way for me to fill that void or that missing piece without having to compromise or sacrifice or give in to certain things, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
it
Yeah.
does. It does. It's interesting, isn't it, that this sort of introspection, the signals you get initially are almost like a very crude language. It's just like a
Mhm.
feeling, or
Yeah.
it's almost like
Yeah.
a physical, like something's not quite right, but you don't really know what it's trying to tell you, right?
Yeah.
It's not like
Exactly.
it's clearly communicating the reason why this isn't working for you is because XYZ values are here and you're here and this is the distance. It's not like
Yeah.
that precise.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
just like it's almost like an alarm bell going off, but you don't know why,
Yeah.
right?
And like you mentioned, I think a lot of people are actually really good at ignoring that bell, right?
Yep.
Like over time you become so desensitized to it, unless if you actually decide and actually sit down and examine that alarm bell, a lot of people will just become so desensitized and they're like they just kind of go about their day having that alarm but not doing anything about it.
Yeah, yeah. It's ironic. I mean, to be fair, you can kind of understand why so many people do that because in the environment, there's no one else who seems to care about your alarm bell or even acknowledge that there is a problem publicly, right? When you were in your workplaces, for example, I love the story when in your startup, everyone got the news, guys, we're not going to be part of this anymore. A bunch of your colleagues start polishing up their resumes and sort of getting anxious about like, where's my next job? Like, how much am I going to make? Like, am I going to be okay? Um, I suspect there probably wasn't anyone, unless it was you, who basically just kind of tried to stop everyone for a moment and say, hey, guys, like, are you sure that this is really what we all should be doing right now, right? Given this opportunity. I almost have this image of like you being very zen and meditative in that moment, while everyone else around you is like scrambling without actually
Scrambling.
understanding what really is happening, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
that's interesting. Go ahead, Jane. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say, I think in a way too, sometimes I think in the in our position, sometimes we also even feel bad for complaining, right? Especially comparing, at least especially as an immigrant, but just like even, comparing to older generations, it's like we're so privileged to have gone to an amazing school, came out of university, made above average salary, right out of university and have all these opportunities to travel, to learn, to grow. And so I think a part of us also feels this fear of saying, like, who am I to like say there's something wrong, or like who am I to complain about it, right? And I think that's actually another layer that's not often spoken about, which is sometimes when you're given a lot already, like pretty early on, it kind of makes you feel like seem ungrateful to be like, no, this is not it. Like this sucks, right? So I think that's another layer, for, at least for me, that I also had to really process through as well.
It's funny that you bring this up. I 100% agree. I will say there is a noticeable difference, over my career now of all the people who I've ever spoken to about the subject matter, right? Which is usually just one-on-one in my office, because they're in
Yeah.
my strategy class, right? And there's a difference between immigrant kids
Yeah.
and non-immigrant kids. The immigrant kids, you're right, it's harder, right? Because there's a sense of it doesn't even really matter what country they came from. It just
Mhm.
has to be that the parents had a harder time, right? That's
Yeah.
all, that's the necessary condition. And when
Yeah.
that kicks in, it's come, I've heard this so many times at this point, like my mom and dad are so and so, or that's what they did for a living. And so I feel like I don't, essentially what they say is I don't feel like I even have the right to be questioning this in some way, shape, or
Yeah.
form,
Yeah.
which I think there's something really tragic about because not all the kids say this who come in, right? And not necessarily all the immigrant kids, but it's at least an obstacle that pops up in their mind.
Yeah.
Um, because what it might suggest, right? I've never seen a study on this, is that immigrant kids, because of this mentality, are far less likely to ever have career fulfillment because of the mindset that they have relative to non-immigrant, which means you need a whole nother generation before you can actually have kids who actually feel like that they might deserve to be happy, right? Which
Yeah.
sounds bizarre, but is absolutely a phenomenon. So I agree with you. There's that extra layer that plays out. Um,
Mhm.
it's interesting. I was just having a conversation, I think it was a week ago, with a girl who had a moment like you, actually,
Mhm. Mhm.
in her mid 20s and is now doing career coaching in Singapore. That's where she's from. But the way she describes the environment there, like I mean, you and I are both of Asian descent, right? So we kind of have some
Yeah.
idea what it's like back in the old countries. I mean, they
Mhm.
are like we're ahead of kind of where they are in this particular mindset,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Actually, yeah, totally. I think even as a part of my 1 year exploration, I've actually gone back to China twice, in a way to also kind of understand my culture because I actually didn't move to Canada until I was 12. So it was long enough for me to have picked up a lot of the values there as well. And so in a way, a part of me going back was not only to connect with family, but to also just observe the culture and the way people think and think about how whether or not the way I think currently has actually came from a lot of that as well. So as it's funny that you mentioned that because for me, I can totally see how your environment and those values that are instilled in you, like culturally, still plays a role in how you show up now currently.
oh yeah. Yeah, and Jane, the older you get, the more you will realize how much of what you've been dealing with is actually multi-generational. In other words, it is linked to ancestry in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
You just don't realize that's the case.
yeah,
Because it's not like they're around to sit down and tell you, like, sorry, we really had these problems, and that's why you're dealing with it. Like that conversation tends not to
yeah.
happen. But you're absolutely right, and not surprisingly, last time I checked, at least job satisfaction rates across all countries in Asia is abysmal, right? As it
Mhm.
has continued to be for the longest time. I'm not sure they were ever good. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah. So, but on a positive note, we're having this chat because you've made some changes and you're kind of in this mode, like, and what I like about your story, I like and don't like in the sense that it doesn't sound like that, there was no professor who kind of sat down with you, for example, or someone externally who sat down with you and said, Jane, what do you want really? And then who essentially at least tried to give you the framework for a lot of the stuff. It sounds like you were self-taught.
Yeah.
The positive is that that's a great accomplishment. The negative is like, it's kind of sad, right? That you
Yeah.
didn't have, wouldn't it have been nice if you had someone?
Yeah. It felt like a very windy road for sure, right? To have, yeah, exactly, like to have some guidance or at least planted some seeds that can, that you can tend to as you're exploring as well. Whereas this is very much like I have no idea. I just got to go with my gut feeling, my intuition, reflect, right? And just it's a lot of trial and error, absolutely. And yeah, sometimes I do wonder how what things would have been like had I known this in my like early 20s or like better yet in university, right? Like what kind of life that would create. So yeah.
Yeah, no, as someone who works on the other side, this is a perpetual point of dissatisfaction for me. I've said this actually a few times in previous podcast episodes when chatting with other guests. It's not like speaking of universities, like on the faculty side, when we have faculty meetings, that actually anyone even talks about what we're talking about, to be
Mhm.
honest. So
Yeah.
it's that's actually the shocking part to me, because I actually thought before I wrote my book that someone's gonna come by and pick this up, and because it's just obvious, right? I was seeing this over and over again, and I was like, there's just no way that this is okay and sustainable and all
Right.
this stuff. But to this day, like I don't, there's virtually no institution I can think of in North America, at least, and I don't think anywhere in the world, to be candid, that has actually decided to make this kind of front and center and actually knows what to do, right, in order to help people kind of do this. I think most of us in the profession actually have our head in the sand on this thing. And there would be people who would actually say, like, what is the problem here? Like, we have great placement rates, they have great salaries. I don't understand what you're complaining about, right?
Yeah.
And so, not that we even get to that conversation, but I can easily imagine that would be a response from many who don't actually think that there's anything wrong. So on that note, Jane, so there obviously wasn't someone, and it would have been nice if there was, what would have helped, right? And this is the nicest way I can phrase the question, because another way I could have asked this is, how do you feel about your experience at Ivy and how it shaped you? Because it doesn't sound like it really came from your parents, but I do know
No.
for a fact that Ivy gave you a certain set of values,
Yeah.
and it sold it pretty hard, right? With lots of social pressure and reinforcement. So looking back on that now, how do you feel?
Yeah, I felt like, for lack of a better term, I really drank the Kool-Aid completely. I think to a point where I actually like fully lost myself in it. I was, actually during university, I was struggling with mental health. I was faced with just like a lot of anxiety, stress. It felt. I think that was the result of me being so disconnected to my authentic self, right? And just really doing things for the sake of doing things. Because at the time, the way that was, the picture was painted is, you try to get, good grades. You make your resume look a certain way so that appeals to the employer. There are really four paths, right? There's consulting, there's banking, there's marketing or accounting, but you should definitely shoot for consulting or banking, right? And so it kind of just, it felt like there were four boxes, but really two. And everyone is just trying to mold themselves into these boxes in the way that will sell themselves to the employer. Whether it's, grades or extracurricular or whatever it is. Like I never, at least maybe other people might have had different experience, but for me, like even going into interviews, I don't think I was fully authentic. I don't think I truly was able to show who I am because I was also told like there are certain things that they're looking for in an interview. And so it just became this to this point of like feeling so distorted, the way that I was showing up and living life, that I was like, this is just not me at all. Um, that's what
Yeah.
it felt like. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it felt like, but at the same time, I also felt like there was like a light at the end of the tunnel, because once you get through it all, once you get to the other side, once you get the job, it's all going to be great, right? And I think that is what kept most people going without really questioning. Similar to kind of what we talked about around career. It's like if you feel like with all your being that, whatever's being sold to you is going to give you everything that you want, you're not going to question what it takes to get there. And that's what it felt like to me being in Ivy.
Oh, that's so funny. So my last podcast guest, I'll be posting the video and audio of that pretty soon here. He emphatically described Ivy as a cult, which I'll be candid. I've been thinking about ever since. I was like, would I really call it that? Um, and I feel like your description has actually just forced me to once again consider the possibility that it has some very cult-like attributes, right? So in other words, light at the end of the tunnel. You guys
Yeah.
all sacrificed really hard, and you are going to get salvation at the end of this, right?
Oh,
Like, and the worst part is you even used a cult like metaphor, which is you said you drank the Kool-Aid. You know where
oh
that comes
yeah. I
from,
didn't
right,
even.
Jane? So,
Yeah.
so anyway, all right. I guess we have potentially more evidence that perhaps there are similarities there, which I had never. It's odd to sort of look back at a former employer and say, "Huh, was I working at a that kind of place?" Right?
Yeah.
And
At the same time, I have also thought about it from their perspective, which is like you kind of always look at like what is their objective, right? Their objective is to have the highest placement rate,
yeah,
like really the good schools. And I think in a way, I guess a lot of people who sign up for it, they do want those jobs. They do want that. That's kind of why they go to that business. Like everyone goes to the business school with the highest placement rate because they actually do want it. So in a way, I can see why it doesn't really help with our fulfillment, but in a way, they're kind of doing their job. So it's kind of hard for me to like kind of judge in that sense because I know that, it's like in a way like we kind of knew what we're getting ourselves into because what their value proposition is will get you into the best, careers in the business world. At least that's kind of the more or less what they sell on the most.
yeah.
So in a way, it's like yeah.
Right. That's you're right. That is what they're promised to do. And to be fair to Ivy, this actually describes all elite B schools ever. There
Yeah.
isn't any difference, right, across them in on these dimensions. So
Yeah.
I think that where I would say though, I think it's a little unfair to tell a bunch of, I don't know, what is it, 20-year-old, 18, whenever you guys decided, right,
Yeah.
and committed to
Okay.
it, that, yeah, that stuff sounds great, that you guys had full knowledge of what you guys were getting yourself into and the
Yeah.
consequences of it, right?
Totally. Yeah.
It's a little bit of a stretch, right? Like you guys were conditioned
Yeah.
to want it, and no one told you otherwise, right? It's not like you had a balanced, set of advocates on one side or the other, where one
Right.
side was selling and then the other was like, wait a second, let's just make sure this aligns well with each of you because that's going to be important for your fulfillment later. Like there was no check on the
Yeah.
other side.
Yeah.
I don't know how well that check would have worked if it actually existed at that point. For a bunch of 18-year-olds, it may not have worked at all anyway, right?
True. That is true.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you're kind of young, you're trying to figure yourself out. You might be insecure, right? Certainly insecurity would be,
Yeah.
in spades at that point. So waving a consulting and banking job with keys in front of, everybody's going to get everyone super excited, probably
Yeah.
irrespective of anything, because nobody knows who they are at that point for the most part.
Yeah.
So that all being said, I'm not sure that we can defend the system to a degree because you're right. It's sort of designed this way. It sounds like is what you're saying. And yeah, it is. The incentives are that way. The performance metrics for the school side,
Yeah.
right? It's not specific to Ivy, but for any school
Mhm.
are actually not fulfillment, right? So it's not like
Yeah.
they survey you guys 5 years later. Like no one's calling you, Jane, right? Tell me if I'm wrong, but if from Ivy saying like, Jane, we just need to make sure that you feel really good about your path and everything that we told you and all. Like no one is calling you for that, right?
No. Yeah.
Um, because it's not part of the performance metric, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
even as you were saying, like if there was a check, let's say to say, is it aligned with the student, right? Purpose or whatnot. Imagine what that would do to the placement rates. Imagine what it would do, like if, let's say, half the people say, "Oh, this is actually like," assuming they actually have that, it's like half the people walk away. Like from their side, they're just shooting themselves in the foot. So in a way, they're kind of locked into this cycle of, it's. Yeah, it's a tough cycle to break for sure
Um,
because
yes, totally agree. And I've been seeing it for a long time on the other side, right?
yeah.
And of course, if you're selling to parents who pay for degrees
Hmm.
in many of these cases, this
Yeah,
is a much easier sell. And if they're immigrant parents, it might be even easier to sell,
sure.
right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
right. And then if it's only the child at some point that complains about fulfillment, then it's not. It wouldn't be shocking if somebody were to say, "Stop complaining. You should be grateful." And
Yeah,
so.
of course. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Whether it's explicit or implicit messaging,
Yeah.
there's something like that going on, right? So it takes a lot of courage to when the system works this way, it takes a lot of courage to break away from that. But you have, which is why this is
Yeah.
such an interesting conversation to have, because I think for a lot of people who are in it, who are listening to this, it actually potentially might give some idea of like, what does it even look like
Yeah.
to try to get out of this when I'm not feeling great about this.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I guess it's been like over 5, 6 years of this journey of like shedding layer by layer, right? And I think it's cumulative, in a sense that like, I think at the beginning when I first started, I very much expected it to be like, I open this door and then all the answers are behind it, right? It's like, I just need to get through this door. And I think as I'm going through this process, I realize it actually is like an onion where you have to peel layers and layers and layers. And sometimes you get to a layer and you think this is it, but then it's actually just another distorted form of an inside layer. So I think the number one thing is to manage expectations. For me, I think it's the most important thing is to realize that there is no, magic key that unlocks all of the answers. And in a way, I think that's also part of life, right? Like part of our life's purpose is to connect to back to who we are, is to develop ourselves in a way that feels fulfilled to us and live a life that is aligned with us. So it's always an ongoing journey instead of thinking that like, oh, there's that finish line, right? That light at the end of the tunnel. So for me, that's I think the most annoying but also comforting feeling, knowing that it's always a journey and it's never going to stop. But it's about kind of cumulative micro, almost like not micro adjustments, but adjustments from all different areas as you move forward that feels more and more aligned every day. And
Yeah.
it accumulates. And so for me, it's not only just career, right? It's also like my health and my relationships. It's everything that I'm doing where I feel into like, does this feel fulfilled to me? And if not, then I dig a little bit deeper and then I have the courage to course correct, right? To really be like, this doesn't work for me. This is all I've known, but I'm going to change it anyways because it's not working for me in the way that it should. And so that's been my journey of just almost like course correcting and adjusting as I go, and really just being able to always come back to myself and honor whatever it is that I'm feeling and have the courage to act differently, even though it might feel uncomfortable or even
Yeah.
scary at
Yeah, it's interesting. So I absolutely agree with you that this is actually part of what life is about. The
times.
irony is that I also think it's true that what you're struggling through is actually a relatively recent phenomenon in like
Yeah,
humanity's history, right?
definitely.
So if
Yeah.
you were to ask, your ancestral generations, like ten back, for example, and say, hey guys, I kind of need some help or like trying to figure out this, they would look at you completely dumbfounded, like, I have no idea what you're talking about. We were
Yeah.
just trying to make it to 30 years old without dying.
Yeah, and have enough food on the table.
Yeah, and food and like not be killed by the neighbor next door or something. Like there was a level of just there was no way they were going to be able to do the same things that
Yeah.
maybe you are.
Yeah.
But it's also true that when you remove a lot of those concerns, you naturally get this as the next level problem, right? I
Yeah,
think that
exactly.
people deal with. We just don't we just don't have a lot to kind of there's of course there's ancient wisdom, there's religions that have ideas, but particularly when you start bolting it to something like career, right? It there's a gap I think that's there,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
which is in your story. It's great because it's actually reflective of that gap. You're like, well, what am I
Yeah.
supposed to do? You're leaning on yourself hard on this one, right? Like
Yeah.
another way the story could have gone is I've got this great coach, facilitator slash whatever,
Mhm.
who's just been helping me along the way
Yeah.
to find my way. But you doesn't sound like that's really been the story.
Yeah, so I do work with different coaches and facilitators, but with the goal of coming back to my own authenticity. So, in a way, it's almost like I think what I also realized is that at the beginning of my journey, I was giving my power away in a sense of like trying to look for someone to give me the answers. And what I realize is that no one has gone through the life experience that I have the ancestors that I have got, have the gifts and the talents and the shortcomings that I have, right? So if I am so unique in that sense, like no one's going to hand me an answer that fits exactly like me without or except for me, right? And so I think that's why I stopped doing that because I realized that everyone is going to have their own filter on life because of their experiences, their strengths, their weaknesses, what they see as the potential future and what is the right thing. And so I think in order to find true fulfillment, you almost do need to come back to yourself because only you know your story, only you can see the world in the sense in the way that you do, right? And so yeah, so I do actually do lean on a lot of people to kind of help me heal and get to deeper layers of me. But the answer of what I should do next, I intentionally make sure that it comes from me and no one else. And
Yeah.
that is, yeah, it's not easy because sometimes you feel like you're spinning in circles, you're kind of experimenting. But what I also realized, like going through this process, to me intuitively feels like this is also preparing me to help other people navigate the exact same thing. And I'm almost like the guinea pig of it. And there's also a little bit of satisfaction there as well, is like what I'm learning can also be passed on to other people in the future as well.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple things I want to touch on there, but let's the first one that comes to mind. Up until now, we've talked a lot about your journey and your process,
Yeah.
and not so much about what you've actually learned along the way, right? So,
Mhm.
are
Mhm.
there things that you can point to now where you're like, I didn't know that about myself before, or maybe that was
Mhm.
suppressed because of the world I
Yeah.
was in, but
Yeah.
now I've learned this about myself. Are there things like that?
Yeah, a lot actually. So let me try to think maybe like the top few that for me that really comes to mind. I think the first thing I knew it, but I w wasn't really sure like how to work with it until kind of recently, which is this being conditioned that my value comes from my achievements or what I do. I think that's a really big one, right? Especially having gone through Ivy and just through as an immigrant and everything. I just got so conditioned to be like, I am only worthy, I'm only valuable if I contribute in a certain way or do certain things or achieve certain things. And that got me constantly looking for validation. A lot of it is unconscious, but looking for validation from other people and outside circumstances. And I realized that is a recipe kind of for disaster a lot of the times because a lot of times we can't control it or we'll get tempted by something externally that's not aligned with us. So I think that for me is a really good lesson, is to realize that my worth is so much more than the external validation and the achievement. And in a way, there's this kind of like a paradox because once you accept that, then you can create things from a place of worthiness that actually can help more people and can add more value. So that's what I'm trying to do now, which is like, how can I come back to my center and like actually know who I am and create from a place of actually wanting to make this world a better place rather than looking for external validation? Because I think what you create as a result of that intention is very different. So that's probably the biggest one that really comes to mind.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not an easy one to fully embrace and accept.
No. I mean, it's still an ongoing journey. I think it's actually still a lifelong one, right? Because we as humans are kind of conditioned to always look for the external, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's layers, right? And I think it's and you the more you do it, the more you'll learn to kind of train the muscle of coming back to yourself and create from a place of, you know, passion, joy, whatever it is, right? Instead of the need for validation.
Yeah. The second thing I wanted to ask about is you alluded to earlier. Let me just ask it directly. Do you feel like this is like school for becoming a coach or a guide of some kind in the future?
Yeah, I mean, potentially. Maybe. Yeah. I think as a part of my exploration, it's also thinking about how can I bring my like unique experiences and also talents and gifts that maybe that might not fit a certain mold. Because I think at the beginning that was kind of the direction I was going at, which is like, okay, how can I like can I do this for other people? But I feel like for me, it's like I almost want to create something beyond what's already been done by combining different things, different skill sets.
But you don't know what that looks like yet. Otherwise, you would have articulated something more specific than what you just said. Is that?
I have ideas, but it's still kind of in the process of being molded or worked on.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So it's still in
Yeah.
stealth mode, and then at some point we will see what you bring to
Yeah.
the world.
Yeah.
Um, Interesting. I'll just say this because I have had these conversations so many times for so many years that just by listening to someone for a certain length of time, I can get a feel for at least possibilities
Yeah.
about what seem like very logical kind of next steps because I'm not in it, right? I get to just kind of hear the story and I'm like, what would be the next chapter of this story, right? That kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
For you, taking everything that you've learned and kind of disseminating, there's a bunch of things that would be valuable, right? One is to prove it's actually possible to
Yeah.
have a different life from being
Mhm.
one that feels stuck and unhappy in a
Yeah.
career in your 20s, and that there's a different kind of mindset that's okay to have, and
Yeah.
that won't sort of destroy everything that you might find valuable in life, right? Or that maybe you should think about what you find valuable in life and whether it's really that valuable.
Yeah.
So there's definitely value in this. And I think what I've observed with these kinds of things, because we're always talking about in this framing, the scariness of moving into the unknown.
Yeah.
And so very few people are actually pioneers in that sense. Like there's very few in a crowd of 100 humans where, it won't be a very large percentage that will say, you know what, I'm okay with that. I'm just going to go. Right.
Yeah.
It's most of
Yeah.
us will be like, "No, I don't know about this. Right. So,
Yeah.
but then when someone sees it, someone goes over and it actually works and it's kind of okay and all these things, then you start to see major bandwagoning effects
Yeah.
take place. Right.
Totally.
But it's interesting when I've observed this, it's often has to be someone that they can relate to, which often
Mhm.
means that, similar kind of demographic or in some other way, shape, or form, they feel like they can relate to. And then that's the trigger for them that makes them kind of do the life change, which they really probably should have done anyway. It was already in them, but
Yeah.
they needed that proof, if you know what I
Yeah.
mean. And
Yeah.
it
Agree.
seems like you're one of these pioneers, right? Who's just going off, and then the only thing that's necessary is that the crowd needs to notice that that's what you've done, because there is a crowd that's in the same spot you were pre-COVID.
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Or in COVID, shall we say, right? The like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Um, and to be candid, I don't know how many people would do it without the proof or actually even a guide, right? Some people need
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
to kind of go
Absolutely.
down that road. Yeah. And somehow you didn't. So that by definition makes you a potential coach,
Still
right?
doing it, but yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just a road, right? You're just further down the road. That's all it is.
Exactly.
So,
That's true. Yeah.
so whatever it is that you're imagining, right, for what you want to do next, this at least could be one possibility of something you would fuse with that, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I'm hoping that's actually what you're going to do in some form at some point.
Yeah, yeah. I think more or less, I think it's I'm more thinking about kind of ways of delivering it that might be the most effective, but I do think so. I think intuitively for me, like I think helping other people to find fulfillment or just helping other people to kind of come into their power, like realizing that they actually do have the power to create the life that they want instead of having to live in a conditioned life or whatever they're told that they should. That feels like that's something that pulls me forward, right? And so I do have that direction. And so I think the working through all of this, one is to almost like gain even deeper experience on my own so that if and when I become the guide, I'm coming from a place of embodying what I'm teaching or what I'm sharing versus just saying it. Because I also realize that there are a lot of people out there who would say things mentally, who would regurgitate things mentally, but they're not actually living that life. They're not embodying whatever it is that they're preaching. And so for me, I think it's a combination of trying to work through something that for me it seems appealing, but also at the same time, I'm also on my journey to really become the embodiment version of whatever it is that I want to guide people to, because that's what builds trust and that's actually what builds creates results rather than empty promises as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is as you kind of continue on this journey to enlightenment, just keep in mind that you're I think you're already at the point that you could actually talk to the COVID version of yourself and
Yeah.
actually,
Absolutely.
like you've got that covered, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Um, and then as you keep progressing, then that next step you'd be able to kind of handle
Mm.
quite easily as well. Like you, in other words, you don't need to get to enlightenment to go talk to the COVID version of yourself.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
you're already ready for some of it.
Yeah. That's a really good reminder, right? Because I keep hearing the phrase like you just need to be a couple steps ahead of someone on the path, right, in order to show them the way. So, yeah, it's definitely a trap to kind of get to this like never-ending loop of like, am I there yet? Or, of constantly wanting to improve. So yeah, so it feels like I'm kind of reaching that place now where I'm like, okay, I'm ready to kind of share things and do things rather than just reflect or experiment, if you will. So yeah, I guess stay tuned for the next couple months because
Yeah,
it's creation mode.
yeah. Once you've unleashed your vision onto the world, yeah, please
Yeah.
let me know. One thing that I'm wondering about that we didn't really talk in detail about when you were going through all these transitions,
Hmm.
what, how did the people around you react to these changes that
Mm.
you were going through? Because uh, ideally, everyone would always be supportive of you on this path. In practice, that's often not the case, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not actually uncommon necessarily for some people, if the changes are really dramatic, right, and authentic,
Yeah.
that they end up having to find a completely new group of people to be
Yeah.
around. That
Yeah.
happens a lot, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wonder, what was your experience like with that?
Yeah, I think that reflects exactly my journey. I would say that there are some friends who, like for the friends who do understand, they always have like a very kind of close, I have that close knit of friends, and some of them are actually from school and from right out of university, although very rare. I think for me, as different evolutions of me appears, it seems like life just created this opportunity for me to find my circle. So, in New York, because I moved to a completely different city, I was able to find a group of friends who really resonated with that version of me, right? And then now, as I'm embarking on this, more or less the people are more virtual just because, physically, I think it's harder to find that kind of next level of people. But I do have a lot of people online and virtually that I'm connecting with that really resonates. So I think, in a way, in order to stay to your point around being authentic, you kind of have to accept that sometimes friendships will fall apart or maybe the depth of the friendship will lighten or weaken over time if you're on completely different paths, and that is okay. And so I have still a lot of friends that I keep in touch with, but maybe not as close as I evolve. And some have completely fallen out of my life, and that's okay. It's like a conscious decision that you choose. But I think it's always important to honor who you are and be yourself than to pretend to be someone else in order to be in a relationship or a friendship or whatnot. So that's definitely a price to pay. But I also see it as when you have the courage to act from that place, like life will bring you people who will resonate with the new you as well. So having that kind of abundance mindset to know that like, it's not just these friends that you have, that if you lose them, it's not the end of the world. Yeah.
Did you find when you were going through that transition and, kind of, shall we say, reorganizing your friendship community, right, and your relationships, in the interim, was that a lonely period, or did you find like the next week there were suddenly five people, you're like, oh, you're the new one, right?
Yeah, I mean there were definitely like lonely times, right? And I would say there are actually a few friends that have been in my life that's kind of stayed with me consistently. But even for me, as I was evolving, I actually intentionally had more solid time for myself because I realized that you almost kind of need to really go inwards in order to kind of allow the next evolution of the version of you to be birthed or created. And so sometimes actually having too much, um, social time can actually distort that sometimes because you can pick up other people's, others' judgments or thoughts or whatnot. That could actually affect your ability to kind of create that next version of you. So I have had these more like controlled or like intentional times where I kind of retrieved into more of a solitude. Like I'll still kind of keep in touch, but a lot less social activities because that is what creates more clarity for me. It might be different for other people, but for me, that was an intentional thing, and I was totally okay with it. It's not comfortable, but especially for an extrovert, but but it's rewarding.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing this.
Yeah.
I guess the kind of last question on this subject that comes to mind is, are there any practices that you do to try to do the introspection, right? Do you just kind of sit down by yourself and you're like, oh, okay. Or, did you meditate? Do you do yoga? Like what is it that gets you to a place where you're starting to see things?
Yeah, so I think meditation definitely. I've been meditating consistently for years now. I think that is probably the first practice I would implement, like if I were to start, because what I realize is that when you first sit on, like when you start meditating, all of these thoughts that are clustered in your head all surface up, right? And so you almost kind of have to go through a process of like going through all of that in order for your mind to settle quiet enough for you to actually be able to receive insights. And most of us have very cluttered like minds full of thoughts that I think when all of that is in your head, you can't really hear like, your intuition or how you're feeling. You can't really connect to that deeper part of yourself. So meditation is 100% like something that I do consistently. And I also do think that it gets your body into the state of more relaxation and calm. So I've also been doing a lot of nervous system work as well because I realized that when your nervous system is in like fight or flight or freeze or fawn, like you can't actually be the authentic you because you're literally reacting, right? Like the parts of your brain are literally reacting to a threat. And so meditation also kind of helps you to calm your nervous system down as well. And so I do yoga and all these things as well to really just calm my nervous system, make sure that I approach life from a place of I guess relaxedness as much as I can. And that creates the level of presence as well. Like I'm more present in my day-to-day moment. So yeah, so I think that's definitely the first thing. I also journal a lot. I find that when you first journal, it'll be kind of gibberish or things that don't really make sense. But if as you kind of free write, as sometimes I have certain questions I want to answer, I'll just write down whatever comes to mind. And I notice that a lot of the time, sometimes my subconscious or whatever will actually have the right answer kind of flowing out onto paper. Like sometimes I don't actually have to think. And that's another example of knowing like, oh, I actually have a lot of the answers within me. I just haven't really had the opportunity to sit down and just like allow it to be expressed. So I do a lot of journaling as well.
Okay.
Yeah, those are probably the top two things I would always like that is kind of like a non-negotiable for me to really connect with myself.
Got it. So meditation and journaling. And
Yeah.
I said that was the last question. I lied. One more popped in my
Okay.
head.
Yeah.
So if you meet someone who's, let's say, the Jane where COVID didn't happen, let's say that, like that
Mhm.
spot, and you meet
Yeah.
that person, what advice would you have for them, knowing what you know now?
Oh, that's a really good question. Have the courage to follow your heart. I think because you know, in the process, like it can get really scary. It can get really uncomfortable to your point as you dig deep and have layers come up. And sometimes you want to quit. You're like, why did I open this Pandora's box? I don't want to know. Like, I want to go back to the Matrix. Like, I don't want to, I just want to unsee everything. So there are times where, you wonder, like, is this even worth it? Like, sometimes it does feel a lot easier and more comfortable being in a lifestyle that is just it's just you're on autopilot. Like sometimes that can be the more comfortable path. But I think when you have the courage to follow your heart and you have the ability to work through whatever it is that comes up, there's a level of satisfaction and fulfillment that you can't fill with any external things. Like it really does come from within. And like for me, like I'm almost addicted to that high of like, oh wow, like I've come home to myself even more, or oh wow, I've connected to myself to an even deeper level. And like that is just the most fulfilling thing that you realize all of a sudden it's like, oh, I actually don't really want a lot of the external things that I thought I wanted, right? Because a lot of those things were just things that you're looking for to fill internal void. Um, so yeah, so in the process, just have the courage to follow your heart because your heart really does know the way.